Good afternoon. If you have not yet gotten a beverage or a snack of some kind, please feel free to slip out to the hallway to grab something. We're about to get started. I'm Loren DeJonge Schulman. I am the Deputy Director of Studies at the Center for New American Security, and this session is an experiment. As you can see, it looks a little different than some of the other sessions we've had today. So if it feels a little looser, a little more workshopy, a little more creative, that's why it's on purpose, and I appreciate you guys being willing to experiment with us, because this is going to be fun. So this is the first ever lightning talk event that we've had at the annual conference, where audiences will get to judge pitches by our staff and our Next Gen fellows, and also be able to participate in the development of those big ideas that all of our speakers will be bringing to the table. Too many conferences in Washington, I think, fail in two ways. One is that they don't involve the incredible brain power of the audience, all of you. And the second is they don't showcase the next generation of talent, who are really the powers behind the thrones of any DC conference you've ever been to. This session is going to try to do both, and it's going to do it in a way that is going to be a little messier than a lot of the other sessions you've been in, but it'll still be fun. We don't have the fancy apps. We do have markers and Post-it notes. We are not going, well, actually, no, I take it back. We are possibly going to war with China in this one, but we'll get to that later. So here's how it's going to work. I am going to introduce a series of speakers. They'll get around 3 to 5 minutes each to make their pitch. What is the big national security challenge that they really care about? And what is their big idea to solve it, to make it better, to make the United States more competitive, or whatever it is that they want to do to address that challenge? They'll get a really short period of time. During that period of time, I want you to think about, in the audience, 4 different questions. And this, my very messy handwriting, as you can see, is up here. What are the first steps you would need to take to actually implement their solution? Who needs to be involved? Not just like, the president, but no, really, who needs to be involved? What needs to actually happen to make the implementation real? And how would you go about executing it? We need your brain power to make these ideas real, and we're going to take these and build them out into something bigger over time. So your participation is critical. If I don't see you working on the sticky notes, then we have done something totally wrong in this session. Okay, so when we're done with all the speaking, we will reset the room a little. You can see in tiny print, but we'll announce later, the names of each of the talks around the room. My speakers will go and man their station, and you'll take the sticky notes that you've been working diligently on throughout the whole session and start tossing them up there. There's no bad ideas in this. This is a design thinking kind of session where if you have an idea that you don't want to identify as your own, it's okay. Nobody will know it's yours. It's just on a sticky note. All right, I'll explain all that again at the end, because I know you're like, sticky notes, what? I have never done this before. Trust me, there's an entire industry around this. The first session will be with the one and only CNAS Research Assistant, Megan Lamberth, who will be speaking on Misinformation is Not a Monolith. Please move on to her slide. Clap.
We have all been witnesses to the rise of digital misinformation and have evidentiary proof of its impact on our elections, our communities, and our civil discourse. Yet with the U.S. presidential election only 508 days away, we haven't really begun to tackle this problem that seems so ubiquitous and so pervasive in our society. In fact, many have decided to throw up our hands and declare this a post-truth world. And so in an effort to combat this narrative of a post-truth society, I want to pose an alternative. An alternative based on the principle that misinformation is not a monolith, and that if we treat it as a problem with a singular solution that must be implemented by a singular actor, we do so at our own peril. And so in an effort to break down this problem of misinformation, I want to focus our attention on one emerging technology, deepfakes. Deepfakes are realistic video or audio recordings that use AI to manipulate original source material, to make it appear that someone does or says something that they actually didn't. And while some uses of deepfakes can be beneficial or even comical, there's legitimate fear that deepfakes can be used to incite violence, disrupt elections, or harm diplomatic relations. Most recently, I'm sure many of you saw a video uploaded online of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that was manipulated to make it appear that she was slurring her words. This video alone was shared thousands of times on different social media platforms and was viewed over 3 million times. And so what can the US do in response? Let's say it's 9 months from now, March 2020. The US is in the midst of its primary elections, and a deepfake video emerges online of a highly ranked 2020 primary candidate doing or saying something extremely provocative. From the moment of the deepfake's inception, there are mechanisms that the US government, private industry, and civil society can implement to reduce the damage propagated by the deepfake. The first mechanism is automated detection software, which is being built to detect manipulated audio and video being uploaded online. Entities in the government and research labs across the country are racing to develop this software that would be able to detect manipulated media. And once this deepfake detection is ready for its debut, its success will be contingent on social media companies integrating that software onto its existing platforms. However, we shouldn't rely on technical solutions alone. The second mechanism is government legislation. Deepfakes have been on the radar of policymakers at the federal and state level for several months now. And while no concrete legislation has been passed, government regulation will play a key role in deterring the distribution and creation of harmful deepfakes. But government legislation doesn't stop a deepfake from spreading once it's emerged online, and technical solutions can only go so far to limiting the damage done by the deepfake. The third mechanism, and what I believe is the most critical component we must undertake, is discovering ways to build digital resilience and tech literacy in our societies. Because we know that cognitive biases, the way that our brain processes information, make each and every one of us susceptible to manipulated information. And in the same way we can't treat misinformation as a monolith, we can't treat our communities as monoliths either. There does not exist a one-size-fits-all solution to building resiliency in our communities. But that doesn't mean we're helpless. First, private industry and state and local governments can fund digital resiliency programs, which engage with different demographic groups. These kinds of digital resilience campaigns have seen success in other countries like Finland or Estonia. Workshops can be conducted at the state or local level to train people on spotting deepfakes and other manipulated information online. And attendees to this workshop can take what they learn back to their own circles of families, friends, and co-workers. Second, we can build resiliency by communicating through the right mediums. Valuable research has been conducted on the different ways that demographic groups consume their news. And we should use this research to communicate about deepfakes and other manipulated information through different forms of media. If the right mechanisms and barriers are put in place by the government, by private industry, and by civil society, the damage done when a 2020 highly ranked candidate video of a deepfake is uploaded online, it won't be reduced, it won't be eliminated entirely, but it will certainly be reduced. Because the reality is, we live in a world with a near constant stream of digital misinformation. And the technology that allows for the creation of deepfakes will only continue to advance, and the barrier to entry will only continue to erode. And if we want to respond to the deluge of misinformation, we may very well be forced to live in a society where truth and facts are simply in the eyes of the beholder. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. That was fantastic. Next up, we have Ainikki Riikonen, who is going to be giving a talk on From Sea to Shining Sea. Next slide. By the way, these titles are incredible.
In 2017, the Houthis took a boat, loaded it up with explosives, and drove it using remote control into the side of a Saudi frigate. They killed 2 sailors. In 2018, DARPA had a successful test of the Sea Hunter, which is an unmanned surface vehicle, or USV. It successfully sailed from San Diego to Pearl Harbor and back home again without a crew on board. More recently, and probably I hope more concerningly at least, the People's Republic of China has been prototyping its own USVs. These allegedly have anti-sub, anti-surface, and anti-air capabilities. Clearly, a variety of types of actors are working on USVs, and I think if there's something that we can draw from the previous example of unmanned aerial vehicles, not only will this technology stick around, it's very likely to proliferate. To compound the problem set, the maritime space is becoming more crowded, more complicated, and even contested in areas of strategic interest like the Red Sea and the South China Sea. This year, the United States has made significant investments in unmanned and autonomous systems, and so I think there's a big challenge and an opportunity here, and what we ought to ask ourselves is, how do we integrate USVs into the maritime space in a way that promotes safety, stability, and also preserves naval freedom of action? The US is a key stakeholder in the future maritime space, and the time is now to really start thinking about how do we build the rules of the road in order to integrate this technology in a way that's favorable to us and everyone else as well. So I've got 3 suggestions here for us all to mull over. First, we can actually begin to anticipate now what that environment might look like. We can leverage bright minds at home and abroad to think about possible points of friction. We can facilitate traditional research through rigorous agendas and also execute wargaming exercises. These exercises and research areas can look into areas like, could an unmanned vessel traverse the South China Sea if it's unescorted and go unharassed? Or how do they integrate into freedom of navigation patrols? How might countries react to this technology? And on a more basic, and I guess in some ways higher level, what do escalation dynamics look like with unmanned systems in this space? Second, we ought to prioritize developing the means of resilient command and control. And when I think about this, I think back to a moment in 2011 when an American stealth drone was flying in Iranian airspace. The Iranians claimed to have taken it down using electronic warfare. This claim's contested, and it's sort of outside of my area to know what the truth is there. But I think, A, obviously we ought to cyber harden our systems. B, I think interestingly, and perhaps more importantly, there's an interesting hypothetical. Let's say that these USVs are autonomous, and the US ones definitely will be. If you just jam the means of communicating with humans, taking the human out of the loop, how do these systems operate? Do they understand maritime contexts, which are complex, obviously with civilian and military craft? Can we somehow teach these AI systems to respond or give them protocols that will allow them to respond in a way that's safe and actually boost trustworthiness of US platforms? Surprise can come from accidents, adversaries, and artificial intelligence systems, and we ought to start mitigating these possible outcomes now. Third and finally, we can begin to build norms even as we're still working on developing these technologies. The president can definitely take me up on this, but I definitely think we still have the best network of friends and allies and partners in the world. Additionally, we're home to a number of private sector stakeholders in the maritime space, like shipping companies. Norm building is ultimately a group activity, and so we can really play to our strengths here. We can consult with these different partners on what would be the palatable way of integrating these technologies. So we can consult with them to figure out how do we integrate USVs into the day-to-day of maritime operations in ways that are favorable to both the fleet and global stability. And so I hope you'll join me at my roundtable or sticky note today. The good news is we can start doing this process today to brainstorm some of the rules of the road and what lies ahead for USVs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ainikki. Next up, we have one of our Next Generation Fellows, Cristina Killingsworth. If you're not familiar with the Next Gen program, it's an incredible program we do annually here at CNAS. Where did Cristina go? There you are. Okay, sorry. Cristina will be talking on fixing a broken pipeline, attracting and retaining mission-critical talent, after my own heart.
Who's our next Richard Green, the public servant who designed and launched the President's Malaria Initiative? Are we recruiting the next Mia Beers, who led a team to help turn the tide in the 2014 Ebola crisis? Are we championing the next Thomas Pickering, the career ambassador who counseled multiple presidents over his 40-year career? The answer is no. Chronic vacancies have been plaguing our diplomatic and development corps for at least the last decade, leading to high workloads and stress, low morale, and increased embassy security risks. This directly impacts our ability to prevent wars and conflicts of the future, deliver humanitarian aid, stop the spread of disease, and project our most core values. And it compromises the deep expertise, continuity of leadership, and willingness willingness to express dissent that is only cultivated over time. And these long-standing problems have only been aggravated in recent years. In 2017, we saw headlines like diplomats sound the alarm as they're pushed out in droves about the exodus of senior career officials who are on the front lines of protecting our national security. So what we are left with is 1, a rigid, uncompromising, and outdating hiring system, 2, austere budgets after years of caps and constraints, and 3, the draining of vital institutional knowledge and leadership. It's a perfect storm where the career, diplomatic, and development ranks are being slowly decimated at a time when their services are needed most to address the vast array of challenges we've heard raised here today. This isn't a revolutionary concept, and yet we continue to overlook this vital aspect of our national security strategy and aggravate a crisis of our own making. We simply do not have a plan to rebuild the nonpartisan foreign or civil service or invite mission-critical talent back into government. So, what can we do to recruit, train, and retain the next generation workforce that we need? Well, first, government needs to commit to embracing the best practices of the private sector, like long-term workforce planning or tailored retention programs, or commensurate compensation when appropriate. The government has, on many occasions, partnered with the private sector to tackle major challenges. Let's try to extrapolate their best ideas, take what works and leave what doesn't. But the first step is acknowledging that this is a challenge worthy of resources, attention, and political capital. Second, public servants must be treated with the respect that they deserve. We cannot retain or recruit the best talent and the best people when we're seeing rhetoric that at best marginalizes their service and at worst treats them as scapegoats in a political battle. Third, we need to give high performers a real opportunity for career progression, including the ability to come in and out of government over the course of a career. As it stands, many career employees plateau early and are forced into the private sector or onto a political track in order to advance their careers. And finally, we must prioritize management experience and aptitude for the people that we hire into political and non-political management positions. Meanwhile, we need to explore ways to welcome back those who have left or were pushed out in recent years and who would otherwise encounter barriers into re-entering the foreign or civil service. In an ideal world, Congress could pass a law that offers a temporary path to rehire mission-critical positions for leaders who took with them the institutional knowledge that we need back. But without Hill action, there are some Band-Aid flexible hiring authorities that we can utilize, like limited term, Schedule B, or accepted positions that enable hiring at will. And candidates for office should explore ways to engage former public servants as they determine the ranks of their national security leadership. And finally, what can you do? Well, you're already doing it. By acknowledging the problem, you are more likely to take steps to solve it. This will require effort from the executive and legislative branches, as well as the private sector, think tank and civil society communities, and importantly, individual advocates. We are responsible for cultivating political champions for public servants. We need to engage our elected officials, promote the value of national service, and give public servants a stronger voice on Capitol Hill and in the national dialogue. And in addition, if you are affiliated with the transition team in the future, as many of you will no doubt be, you can advocate to 1, treat this issue as a national security threat, 2, actively engage career employees in decision-making processes, and 3, refrain from putting political appointees into positions traditionally held by career employees. And finally, you can brainstorm and prepare ways that we can tackle this challenge both here today and moving forward. Thank you for being here and for giving this the thought it deserves.
Well, Cristina, please let me +1 everything you just said. Next up, we have another Next Gen Fellow, we got Dave Zikusoka, who is going to be talking about the Second Battle of Midway. This may sound a little familiar to a lot of folks who were in the last session, but it's a different perspective on a U.S., China, Taiwan scenario. Move to the next slide, please, which has, unfortunately, the incorrect name on it, but you'll get the idea.
So, it's 2025. And the Chinese Amphibious Action Group is set out for Taiwan. Stop me if you've heard this one last hour. Sorry about that. My version is a little bit different. The United States will intervene to stop this offensive, but there is an U.S. ship within 4,000 miles of Taiwan, and air bases across the region were vacated soon after the crisis began. U.S. forces are going to fight this battle from 4,000 miles away. Call it the Second Battle of Taiwan. 4,000 miles. It takes a bomber about 7 hours to fly that distance, a guided missile destroyer about a week to do the same. In a time of conflict, it's not normal for our forces to operate from so far away. And as the military is currently conceived, it's not feasible. So why do this? We know that in the opening hours and minutes of a conflict, China will use its ballistic missiles against our ships and our bases in the region. If we lose those assets early on, we may not make it to the fight. The cost equation as it currently stands is not in our favor. But we can flip things to our advantage if we start pursuing new investments and operational concepts today. So what does 2025 look like if we start fighting from so far away? 2025 looks like a mega constellation of hundreds of American intelligence satellites keeping constant, unblinking watch over the Chinese fleet as they traverse. They're gathering images, they're geolocating radar emitters, intercepting communications, and they're facilitating comms for U.S. forces throughout the region. Whereas a typical American satellite up to this point was about the size of a school bus, each one of these satellites is about the size of a backpack. They're distributed by the hundreds, and they're hiding in plain sight inside a mega constellation owned by a private internet service provider. 2025 looks like B-52s, joined by C-17 and C-130 cargo planes. They've been flying conventional deterrence patrols. Since the beginning of the crisis, at least a few have been airborne at any time, and they're signaling Washington's readiness to respond. They've been flying from bases as far away as Hawaii and the West Coast, and they're waiting to drop weapons from their bomb bays and from their cargo holds. 2025 looks like any American military ship with enough flat deck space for a shipping container being pressed into service. The total combat ships, U.S. merchant marine cargo vessels, and even the occasional barge have all become strike platforms. 2025 looks like American hypersonic weapons solving the distance problem. Launched from containers and dropped from aircraft, these missiles are accelerated to speeds of Mach 20. At these velocities, a trip from Honolulu to Taipei takes about 18 minutes. As they reach the terminal phase of their flights, the mega constellation provides direct terminal guidance to guide them to their targets. So what do we accomplish with this approach? First, we take targets off the table for China's ballistic missiles. They can choose to attack our ports and our air bases in the region if they want, but those assets are no longer as important to our intervention. Critically, we save money on costly, unreliable missile defenses. Second, we've reduced the space that we have to search for targets. Instead of consuming operational capacity and risking human lives to find and destroy mobile missiles across the vast space of mainland China, we've reduced our search area to the Taiwan Strait. The Taiwan Strait covers 21,000 square miles. The Eastern Military District Command of mainland China covers 10 times that size. Third, we've given China busy work. Our sensors, our shooters, and our munitions are too widely distributed. If they want to protect their fleet in the strait, they have to search a large space over the whole ocean. Our mega constellation is too numerous to jam or destroy effectively. The shooters are all the way out near Hawaii, and the hypersonic munitions fly too low for ballistic missile defenses and too fast for traditional surface-to-air missiles. China has yet to demonstrate a credible expeditionary combat capability. For example, they have 23 in-flight refueling tankers versus about 450 in the US Air Force inventory alone. China also lacks island basing access in the Pacific, so they can't island hop their way to the fight the way we did in World War II. And this is where the deterrent value of this approach starts to kick in. China can choose to develop these competencies, but they'll only come at great costs. The US, on the other hand, has been fighting away games for over a century. Firing from 4,000 miles away puts our forces right near Midway Atoll, the site of one of our greatest victories far from home. So, China's been building a trap for us. Let's build a trap for them on our terms. Let's start thinking about how we'd fight a second battle of Midway to ensure we never have to fight at all. Thank you.
Well, Dave, if only you'd been an insert in the last session, I feel like we might have had some better luck. That was great. Next up, we have two more CNAS staff, Neil Bhatiya and Kristine Lee, who will be talking about the key to success in North Korea, rock-solid alliances. Next slide.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. We're here because it's time for Plan B on North Korea. Kristine and I will argue that the upcoming meeting between President Trump and President Moon at the G20 2 weeks from now is the administration's best bet to get their North Korea policy back on track. Our bottom line recommendation is this. The U.S. needs a much smarter and much more comprehensive regional approach if it has any hope of making progress in this critical security area. Before Kristine outlines the mechanics of that approach, I just want to recap what happened at Hanoi. Why did the summit fail? Why did Trump walk away? What he says is because he and Kim share a different vision. And I think that's a polite way of saying that not only couldn't they agree on what denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula meant, but they couldn't agree on any of the next steps necessary to get to that shared definition. And I think you saw this play out in the way that the deal that was on the table fell apart. Kim said simply, I'll shut down Yongbyon if you lift the 5 most recent sanctions packages passed by the UN Security Council. And I think Trump made a simple calculation that that big for big plan wasn't going to work. A partial shutdown of Yongbyon, while nice, would not address the other covert facilities that US intelligence believes North Korea is operating. Additionally, the shutdown of Yongbyon would not be commensurate with the sanctions relief that North Korea was going to get in return. Those 5 most recent sanctions packages are the most restrictive measures passed on North Korea to date, targeting the most important sources of their revenue. So how did North Korea respond to this setback? Well, Kim doubled down on his own regional approach. He had an April summit meeting with President Putin in Vladivostok. Prior to Hanoi, he had already spoken or met with Chinese leader Xi Jinping 4 times, and those consultations are likely ongoing. On the surface, I think we can see that his strategy there was twofold. One, that Russia and China are 2 countries where a lot of illicit trade with North Korea still originates. And 2, he wanted to remind President Trump that there are other powers in the region that have a vested interest in the outcome of their negotiations. So what does this mean for us? Well, the U.S. needs to respond similarly, rebuilding the foundations of its own regional approach. To outline how, I'll throw it over to Kristine.
So building off of Neil's excellent points, for the past couple of years, the United States has primarily looked at the North Korea threat through the lens of bilateral negotiations with Pyongyang, rather than through a framework that focuses on key regional allies, namely Japan and South Korea. Counterintuitively, however, the success of successfully managing down the North Korea threat hinges not on Washington-Pyongyang bilateral relations, but rather on the U.S.-ROK alliance. This is why we argue that the Trump-Moon summit later this month will ultimately be more important than any future Trump-Kim summits. So today I'll briefly touch on 3 primary variables that will shape the long-term trajectory of the alliance. The first is South Korean domestic politics. The second is negotiations around burden sharing, or the Special Measures Agreement. And the third is the China factor. So firstly, South Korean domestic politics is deeply divided, and these fissures will inform the long-term health and sustainability of the alliance. There are certain left-leaning parties within South Korea, and even factions within the Moon administration itself, that argue for the ultimate withdrawal of American troops from the Korean Peninsula. Second, and relatedly, negotiations around burden sharing coincide with a broader question of how to evolve the US-South Korea alliance to make it more sustainable over the long term. Increasingly, as the United States is framing its alliances globally in transactional terms, it's also talked about its alliance with South Korea in terms of dollars and cents. Understandably, this has fueled anxieties within certain segments of South Korean society that they need to ultimately wean their country off of US security guarantees. Third and finally is the China factor. There's a growing sense in South Korea that it's been left out of the United States' free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. And even as the Moon administration remains wary of aggravating China, there's a desire to find areas of synchronicity between South Korea's Asia policies beyond the Korean Peninsula and the United States' broader Asia policies. So the United States needs to find ways to elevate the alliance with South Korea beyond its current near-exclusive orientation around North Korea. Only then, we argue, can the United States achieve success with North Korea. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, you guys. So as a midstream reminder for the folks who came in last, we've got sticky notes and markers on the table and 4 key questions that we want you all to be answering while you're listening to the talks. First steps for how do we make these ideas actually real? Who needs to be involved? What has to happen? And how to get it done? Any ideas are welcome. You don't have to sign your name. So, it's any idea can be put out there no matter how crazy. Last 2 talks. Next one by Nicole Alexander, another Next Gen fellow. The case for changing recruitment. Next slide, please.
Hello. So we all know our adversaries, some of which are Russia, China, Iran, and terrorism. And the 2 things that I think are threatening our ability to compete and win against them is the military recruiting system and the narratives that our recruiters are up against. So for the next few minutes, I'd like you to imagine the impact changing these 2 things and improving them would have on the military's pool of diverse talent needed to compete and win. Our adversaries are challenging the very fabric of our culture, values, politics, and economy. And they're challenging the hearts and minds of people at home and our partners abroad. Our adversaries present distinct threats, and individually they're homogenous, but collectively they're diverse. They don't make up a single race, ethnicity, education level, and the women and men who lead them grew up in a variety of life experiences, whether it's economic deprivation, oil booms, or tyranny. 86% of the time, diverse teams make better decisions. And I'd go to say that the United States military is not a very diverse team. Today, our military doesn't reflect the greater U.S. population and the diversity we have within it, whether it's race, gender, cognitive diversity, or experiences. And it's a national security challenge if it doesn't. While factors such as leader development, talent management, organizational culture affect who becomes our leaders in the national security community, if you don't have a basic diverse pool to develop from, we're going to have some problems at the end of the day. So right now I'd like you to picture a typical scenario for an average military recruiter for the enlisted ranks. In a small town of Rockingham, North Carolina, close to where I just drove from this morning, a military recruiter, an Army recruiter, is charged with finding 2 recruits a month. He spends about 60 hours a week out there on the streets in the big towns he starts going to, or the big cities, Chapel Hill and Raleigh-Durham. He's struggling and he's not meeting his quotas. And so supervisors now make him come in on Saturdays, spending more time away from his family to continue his training on how to be a recruiter. And then the supervisors say, if you don't start making the cut, your evaluation report is going to reflect how poorly you are serving your country. And that will have long-term effects on his career. So a couple days go by, maybe some weeks, and a veteran recruiter pulls him aside, puts his arm around him, and says, "Big Sarge, you have to stop going to those big white cities. Those people aren't joining the military. And if they do, they're going to become military officers. You have to go to the small towns of Rockingham and Maxton and Laurinburg. Those people have family that are already in the Army. They're easy recruits. But don't go to Red Springs because the Air Force recruits out of there. And they lost a sergeant from that town, so you're not going to find any Army recruits there. If you go to Aberdeen, the Marines own them, so don't go there either." So Big Sarge goes out, and he starts going to Laurinburg and Maxton, and he starts making his numbers. And so he never goes back to the idea of finding diverse talent. Today, 77% of our military officers and leaders are white. Women only make up 6% of the general and flag officer ranks. That's 66 women out of 426 flag officers and general officers. Across the military officer ranks, 18% are women. The U.S. population, we're standing at about 50% or so women. And the great civil divide is getting bigger every day. 84% of service members have family that have been in the military. My own family, I'm in the Army, by the way, my own family, 14 of my immediate family members have served, are either currently serving or are in training to serve. My 4.5-year-old daughter, she's told me for the last few weeks and months that she wants to be a helicopter pilot that shoots guns with fire. I will say though, 2 days ago, she also told me she wanted to be a DJ rock star with ninja skills. So maybe she'll change that in our family tree here. So every day we're inundated with headlines, media, and narratives that tell us the negative things about the military. We hear that people who join the military, it's because they don't have job opportunities on the outside. And if they do come in, when they leave, they're going to have a hard time finding jobs. Women, man, they shouldn't be joining the military because sexual harassment and sexual assault is so pervasive, that's the only experience they're going to walk away with. And that narrative is so strong, 39% of military families even won't recommend their daughters to join the military. And sadly, 63% of youth, ages 16 to 24, the prime recruiting age, they think that service members leaving the military are either likely or very likely to have psychological or emotional problems when they leave. So while there are many factors that impact our military leaders and who they are and who they become, such as organizational culture, talent management, and leader development, again, the basic pool that we're drawing from needs to start at diversity. So some changes that we could make. We need to look at the narratives our recruiters are up against by taking actions such as having recruiting material that does reflect some of the diversity we have. And maybe we should think about having our media and leaders talk more about the other jobs that are in the military instead of the Navy SEALs taking the beach, warheads on foreheads, direct action, shoot them, drop the bombs, all of those things. There's so much more that the military has to offer and that the military does every day. And there are success stories about veterans and spouses integrating into civilian life, and I'd like to hear more of those. For the recruiting incentive system and the recruiters themselves, we should be thinking more about who's being chosen to be a recruiter. We can't have men that don't want to talk to women. How are they going to get those women to join the military? Maybe we should even think about not sending people from the deep south to metropolitan cities of the west, because they're going to struggle to connect with the experiences and the values of the people that they're trying to recruit from. And lastly, we need to think about the incentive system. If a person is expected to work 60, 80 hours a week to find 2 people a month, it's going to make them keep going back to the same places. So while there are many things that affect the talent that is needed at the very top levels of the national security community, if we don't have a basic pool of diverse people to draw from, we may never, and we may always struggle to meet the challenges we face against Russia, China, Iran, and terrorism. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Obviously, the Army is lucky to have you as its key recruiter here. The last talk of the day, Elsa Kania, who is going to be giving a talk on to 5G or not to 5G. Elsa has already been part of a panel session today, and I believe arrived from Australia this morning. So thank you. Give a big welcome to Elsa. She closes out our lightning session.
That is the question, I suppose. What are we going to do about 5G, and how do we ensure we are on track for a secure 5G future? To start, let's try to understand 5G, what it means, and what it can do for our country. 5G is more than a buzzword. It's also not the fake 5G logo that may have showed up on your phone lately for marketing purposes. It's much, much more than faster 4G, promising ultra-high speed, low latency, and massive throughput, with the potential to launch entirely new industries. Today's advances in 5G could change our society and economy in ways we can't yet imagine. From smart cities with self-driving vehicles to greater automation in manufacturing to increase productivity. 5G may also shape the future of warfare with impactful applications from future battle networks to Internet of Things on the battlefield.
5G also might be deeply dangerous, at least according to my aunt and Russian propaganda. RT has warned of a coming 5G apocalypse, running stories with claims that 5G causes cancer. This rather fascinating intersection of geopolitics, complex technologies, and misinformation speaks to the confusion that some of the technicalities and marketing on 5G can create. Even The Daily Show has joined the fray on 5G. In fact, CCTV, China's state network, very much liked and chose to air a clip in which Trevor Noah described China's 5G as so far ahead that this is a race many people are saying America has lost already. But that's not true. It is clear that the future of 5G has emerged as a frontier for US-China rivalry, and at first glance, China does appear poised to become a global leader in 5G, achieving a unique first-mover advantage in the process. China is actively embracing a 5G future, dedicating hundreds of billions to 5G development and deployment. This 5G era is well underway in China today, it seems, with a growing number of cities launching 5G pilots and pursuing applications in education, healthcare, and launching virtual reality programs. In fact, this spring, the world's first remote brain surgery using 5G occurred in China. And meanwhile, national champions like Huawei are claiming to be the world's undisputed leader in 5G, despite the pressure they're facing and some of the company's apparent weaknesses, as recent events have shown. But as Huawei continues its quest to stand on top of the world, in the words of its founder, Ren Zhengfei, the company's supposed leadership is worth questioning and should provoke some skepticism, given the continued controversies from IP theft to poor security practices, which have exacerbated concerns about the risks that Beijing could exploit its global reach for purposes of espionage or, at worst, sabotage. But at the same time, there are reasons to be excited about 5G and all that it could enable in the future, it does present unique security threats and challenges given its complexity and the extensive connectivity. However, it's troubling that some countries pursuing 5G seem to be willing to overlook those threats and security concerns and to value low-cost options over assured security. Huawei has urged Europe, for instance, to vote for 5G and choose Huawei for a smarter future, marketing itself as if there were no alternatives. All of this talk of a race for 5G risks obscuring what is truly at stake. 5G will be tantamount to critical infrastructure, so the stakes are much higher and speed must not be prioritized over security going forward. Moreover, 5G is not just a race, and Huawei isn't clearly winning, at least not yet. But whether we win or lose, so to speak, in 5G will depend on the policy choices that we make today. In fact, 5G is more of a marathon, and it is just getting started. The real fight in 5G is not simply about rapid deployment, but about the critical underlying technologies that will shape the future of 5G and beyond, even to 6G. The standards behind 5G are still taking shape today. And although Huawei has often dominated the conversation, some of its rivals have unique strengths in 5G and are still very much in the competition. So as we look for a more secure future for 5G, policy debates must not be merely reactive to Huawei's marketing and the global controversies that continue to swell, but rather must concentrate on proactive alternatives. The Trump administration is to be commended for recognizing the strategic significance of 5G, and some of the policies underway are a good start. However, America first in 5G is not a winning strategy. In this 5G fight, the U.S. cannot succeed alone, nor can we succeed without actively investing in our own future competitiveness. What might a strategy for a secure 5G future involve? First, we have to invest in reinvigorating American technological leadership. We have to invest in large-scale construction of 21st century digital infrastructure, including looking to close the digital divide that otherwise risks leaving rural America behind in the 5G era. The U.S. should also pursue options to disrupt the status quo and pursue new approaches to 5G for next-generation advancements, which will require increasing support for basic research and leveraging support from the government to catalyze innovation. To support science and bolster investments is not to out-China China, but rather to learn from our own history and innovation in a way that is deeply American. And next, we have to assure that future 5G networks will be secure by design from the start. The decision to exclude Huawei from American critical infrastructure is warranted, but that's really only the beginning of thinking about 5G security.
since we're only starting to appreciate the risks in our supply chains and throughout the life cycle of these complex technologies. Further, it's vital that we pursue deeper collaboration and cooperative innovation with our allies and partners and develop a shared approach to a 5G future. Ultimately, the 5G fight is just getting started, and I think there are reasons to be optimistic and not to assume we've already lost. And I think if we do embrace the 5G future, we can see a much more secure and exciting road ahead of us. And so the much ado about Huawei is only one part of the conversation, and I hope we can continue moving the discussion forward. Thanks.
Okay, first, let me say I feel much more reassured about the future of national security with the next generation of national security leaders we had speaking here today. So first, before we do anything else, can we give them a huge round of applause? Okay, I promised a little bit more on the sticky notes. So what we're going to do is each of the speakers are going to go to their little corner of the room, and I will reintroduce them in a moment so you can remember who they were and what their topic was. The key questions that we're asking the audience to think about today, and you guys are vital to this conversation, are first steps that need to be involved in implementing any of these ideas. And that's the most critical question. If you do nothing else, help us think about what are the first steps that actually are going to make these ideas possible. The other ones are the obvious ones of who needs to be involved, what has to happen, and how do you get it done. So we are going to, I have terrible eyesight, so I'll actually try to do these in not quite order. So to 5G or not to 5G, Elsa, stand up, raise your hand. Where'd you go? Stand, raise your hand. You'll be over here. The next corner, Dave will be talking about what we need to actually win the second battle of Midway over here. Dave, stand up so we know where you are. Walk over to your corner. In the far side of the room, my favorite title of the day, Ainikki, will be doing From Sea to Shining Sea. God, what a beautiful pun. It's so amazing. Ainikki will be over here. In this back corner, Nicole will be making the case for changing recruitment. Nicole, stand up. She'll be in the far back corner. Where'd Nicole go? Right over here. All right, here is why I actually go blind. What does this next one say? Misinformation is not a monolith. Megan will be in the far back corner over on this side. Megan, stand up, wave. All right. This side over here will be the key to success in North Korea, rock-solid alliances. Rock-solid alliances, that's incredible, actually. Come on, guys. Kristine and Neil will be over here. You can help them make the case for rock-solid alliances. And lastly, in another discussion on the civilian recruitment side, we'll have Cristina, who will be fixing a broken pipeline, attracting and retaining mission-critical talent. Cristina, stand up. She'll be over here. So, sticky notes. Fill out your answers. The craziest ideas, the better. The most important question is your first steps. They'll be over there to discuss your ideas with you for the next 15 minutes. Feel free to refill your drinks. And then when we're done, you're welcome to join us in the reception after. Thank you all so much for joining our experiment in National Security Lightning Talks.